In order for us to make the best money decisions, we have to be at least aware of our emotions around money and hopefully practicing emotion regulation skills. We're doing things that help calm us in order to kind of connect with our prefrontal cortex, the thinking brain, in order to say, hey, all right, we're going to make smart decisions, wise decisions that.
Welcome to the Real Estate Mogul MD podcast. Thanks for tuning in and taking control of your financial future. This is a show where we not only motivate and inspire, we give you actionable real-world experience to help you live life by design. You'll hear journeys and stories from other physicians, investors, coaches, consultants, and entrepreneurs. And now, here's your host, Brett Riggins. How many times have you found yourself thinking about money? Versus how many times have you found yourself talking about money? Or better yet, talking about the emotions around money, talking about your emotions around money. And I tell you what, it's very fascinating. And a lot of the times we don't even think about the difference and our lack of ability to talk about the emotions that we have around money. And these emotions will stem way back to when we were just young little kids and how we were conditioned to feel about money by our parents or by our home situation, whether we had money, didn't have money, did it cause fights? What kind of feelings or emotions were created then create the stories that we tell ourselves. And now we live off these actions and we may not even know it. One of the biggest pieces is going to be understanding the emotions that we have around money. And today's guest, listen, is a certified financial therapist. This is amazing. The conversation is amazing. It's also a certified marriage and family therapist. I want everybody, please welcome to the show, financial therapy thought leader, Nathan Astle. All right, Nate, welcome to the show. Thank you for your time today. I'm excited to dive into this. And I know that you like talking and like talking about money and couples, right? So I'm excited here. Nate, could you just tell the listeners just a little bit about your background, your journey, and what it is you're doing right now?
Sure, yeah. I do like talking. It's my job as a therapist, right?
Mm.
So I have a master's degree in couples and family therapy, so kind of a therapist by trade, and I've always worked with money issues, whether that's couples with money challenges or money conflict, or someone with financial trauma or some kind of psychological healing that needs to happen there, or people looking to change a behavior, I mean, gambling or overspending or something like that. Um, I I've been doing this for several years now, and it's been just fun. Money is something that is really, really interesting just to see the psychological effects of money, but also how it shows up in our relationships. And yeah, so I have a private practice where I meet with those individuals, and I also own a platform that's a treatment team model. So I work with financial planners and financial counselors, and we provide treatment teaming for clients. So, I'm working on the psychological, emotional, relational aspects. A counselor typically works on skill building, budgeting, that kind of day-to-day money management stuff that we don't usually get a lot of training in. And then a financial planner looks more at the long-term goals. But yeah, so I wear a lot of hats, but I'm always excited to talk couples and money or financial trauma. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I guess where I would love to start is where I guess some of the first conversations that you would have with people where you could bring value to them. What are some of the big, say, flags that would stick out and say, hey, it would be helpful if I talked to somebody about this?
Yeah. The first things that I like to bring up with people when they first come in is money is inherently emotional. Um, we like to think that it's this logical, rational process that, we do the thing that makes the most math sense, but it's inherently, when I say it's inherently emotional, it means we cannot escape the fact that it is value laden, that it goes through our brains, which is hardwired for emotions, and sensing dangers and fear and all these sorts of things that contribute to it. So, in order for us to make the best money decisions, we have to be at least aware of our emotions around money and hopefully practicing emotion regulation skills. We're doing things that help calm us in order to kind of connect with our prefrontal cortex, the thinking brain, in order to say, hey, all right, we're going to make smart decisions, wise decisions, that, and we're not going to let any big feelings kind of overtake that control. So that's a lot of what I start working out with people.
And these emotions around money, what, I guess we dive into that just a little bit. How do we understand what our emotions around money may be?
Yeah, a really helpful starting place is the past. What messages did I hear around money growing up? Do I remember feeling any way around money? Do I remember seeing my parents struggle or not struggle with money? Um, I'll give you an example from my life. So I, my parents, we were solidly middle class, and but I do remember my parents fighting quite a bit about money, and it caused me a lot of distress growing up. Um, Not necessarily the money itself, but how I would feel when my parents would fight about money. And I kind of grew to resent it. I hated the fact that my parents were always fighting about this thing. And I was like, oh, money's just causes so many problems. And it became something that I avoided, something that I resented, something I had anger and sometimes fear about, and sometimes sadness. Flash forward to my relationship with my wife, and it became something that I didn't like talking about. I didn't want to go over the budget. I didn't want to talk about how each of us was spending. And this pattern comes from what we call a script, which is a belief about something. And I had what's called a money avoidant script. I wanted to avoid money as much as possible. Um, and that script or that belief had real life consequences for how I was behaving, not only with my money, but also with my partner. So it's really helpful to start thinking like, how do I feel when I think about money? How do I feel when I think about my money? Am I hopeful? Am I confident? Am I scared? Am I inadequate? What are the feelings that come up? And then we can start asking ourselves, when did I first start feeling that? Um, where did this start for me? How is it showing up now? I guarantee there's at least one or two direct money behaviors that come from these feelings that
Mhm.
show up.
So I'm hearing conditioning at an early age, and then how that creates the stories that we tell ourselves, basically creating our personality, these actions that we take, which is interesting. When you said that, you parents had disagreements about money, and mine did as well too. But I feel like I've taken a different approach. So I'm sitting here trying to figure, okay, what are my emotions around money? And what does that mean? What's my why? Right? We hear that a lot. What's our why? I
Mhm.
am a very driven person, and like there's only one way success. And I just feel like some of my challenge is not missing life because I'm focused on the goal. I need to be present in the moment on that path. And this thing that this emotion around money that I have is that I do not like the idea that I can't afford something. Like, I
Mhm.
think inside of me, whether it was not having money growing up or whatever it was, like that conditioning, I can't break out the little pieces of it. But I feel like that is an emotion that's strong in me to where I don't like being told no. Like, I'm like, okay, how can I make this work? If you say it can't work, how can I make it work? And I think that aligns with maybe my emotion around money is I don't ever want it to hold me back, even if
Mhm.
it's just helping somebody. It bothers me that I can't help somebody because I don't have the money to, if I can't help my family, if I can't do something that I want to do. What is that emotion. Do you see how those connect with that conditioning and stories?
Hugely.
Mm,
No, this this makes a lot of sense to me. And obviously, I don't know your story. I don't have the reasons of why, but I could see some potential outcomes of this feeling not getting helped or worked through or whatever. Um, so, and I'm not saying this is true for you, but it could be, right? If I feel like I don't like being told no, or I have this I'm in this headspace where I don't like feeling like I can't do something, when inevitably I do run up against something that I can't or shouldn't do, I might be more likely to be like, no one's gonna tell me, and I might engage in more risky behavior. Or I might go instead into more of a shame spiral, a shame kind of experience where I can't, maybe I can't afford that thing, or I don't, I can't do that thing. And so it means something about me. Um, I'm bad. I messed up. I'm not good enough. Um, my family's depending on me, and I'm not enough for them
mm,
because I can't buy this thing, or I can't buy these clothes for them or take them on these vacations. Um, and again, I'm not saying that is you, Brett, but I'm saying these kinds of things are hugely impact how we feel in our day-to-day life. There's not a day there's not a day that you live that you don't interact with money in some way,
mhm.
whether it's working for it, spending it, living in a home that uses it,
Avoiding it.
avoiding it, right? Um, so if we if we have belief systems or emotions that we don't work through actively, um, that has a huge implication of how we experience our day to day. If
Mhm,
I'm consistently feeling shame, or I'm not good enough, unworthy, inadequate because of some money thing, that's going to affect my mood. It's going to affect my mental health for sure. It's going to affect my relationships and how I talk with my wife or my children. Um, the impacts can be really, really big. And I think on some level, people kind of inherently understand this, that, money is emotional, but then you start asking them about their money beliefs and their money feelings, and it can get really deep really fast. And
mhm.
that's what makes it fun.
The challenge there too is, and again, I'm speaking from my experience along this journey, my emotion around money, uh, because I work hard, because I don't let down, because I keep growing. I originally had this idea like I was entitled to this. I deserve this. I'm working for this. And I kind of link this out. I'm not a physician, but I'm linking it to like the physician path around, hey, you've made it, now you deserve to drive a car. You are entitled to driving a car that the physicians drive or the house that the doctors have, right? But it doesn't align with where you may be based off your debts, based off of your emotions, the emotion around the money. If you haven't worked through that, then adding to this is only going to add fuel to the fire based off the debts that you're in. So there's so many things to that. So the entitled piece is tough. Whenever I forget I was having a conversation with somebody. Whenever you say I'm entitled to, or I feel like I deserve something, it's like that's where you should just stop and you should figure out a better way of maybe asking yourself how you feel at that point. Because if you feel you're entitled to something, is that really, do you deserve something like that? What are you telling yourself to line yourself up for that?
Yeah. I feel like when I hear entitlement, I think it sometimes gets a bad rep.
Hmm.
So, or the feeling of entitlement. Um, Entitlement comes from a very often a very normal place, which is I need or want something, and something doesn't feel fair. It's not fair that I can't have it. Um, that's something even really young children understand. Um, Now, it might not be true. Like, it might not be like actually unfair that you can't have the toy. But it is an emotion that we don't want to shame our emotions. We don't want to say, like, oh, I'm being so entitled right now, because shame is the enemy of change. We can instead say, hey, it makes sense that I would want these really nice things. I have worked really hard to get to this point. I have put in a lot of effort, years of school and work, and it makes sense that I want the nice thing. And there's nothing wrong with me for wanting the nice thing. And that doesn't mean that I get to make all my decisions based on my wants. Um, and so I feel like maybe a small nuance, but can we validate the entitlement without acting from it? Um, it's hard to do, but I think this compassionate approach, be like, yeah, who doesn't want a nice thing? That's not bad or abnormal, and it doesn't make me a bad person. And I can validate that feeling without acting from it.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know. I don't know what you think about that, but I feel like that's
I love like drawing from it, pulling the value from it. But there's a piece in that where your emotional intelligence has the ability to separate the two, the
mhm,
respond versus react kind of scenario, that action that you take from these thoughts. Everything starts with a thought, and we create our actions from those thoughts. So being able to separate those two, yeah, it's great. And maybe it's even the back to the stories, we tell ourselves, changing that story, being able to understand, hey, this is how you're feeling. It's okay. Don't move into the shame spiral, right? The
mhm,
shame being the enemy of change, right? Um, don't move into that, but understanding that entitlement can't push your action.
mhm. Yeah.
So,
Can I find a more measured approach to this? I want that thing, and I'm not saying no to that thing forever. I'm just gonna give myself some time. I'm gonna do some taking care of myself, some emotional processing. I'm gonna bring this up with my partner, my friends, my therapist, my journal, and before I make big choices. Um, that's that will make a hell of a difference,
mhm,
honestly, especially if you practice that regularly.
yeah. So conditioning and stories, um, and kind of taking those basically cause or create us to decide, or do we decide? I mean, everything's a choice. We decide, right, what actions we take from there. And this is kind of like bumping in now these financial traumas.
Mm.
What do you, I mean, what is a financial trauma?
Yeah, okay, so, and now I realize I might be talking to physicians that know the brain a lot better than me, and that's okay. Um, the idea is that, our brain that does a whole lot of things, obviously. Our prefrontal cortex is the part kind of by your forehead. It's in charge of logical thinking and rational decision making. Generally, it's the part we want in charge. We also have our amygdala, which is um, in charge of keeping us alive, right? Or our survival mechanisms come from that. The problem is our brain doesn't do a great job of distinguishing between physical danger and emotional danger. Um, our if we are in fight or flight mode, our body and our brain gets dumped with cortisol, that stress hormone, our heart rate increases, our breathing increases, our muscles tense. Um, that served a really important purpose if we were, fighting tigers. We needed that energy and that quick decision making um, in order to escape the danger. The the problem is though is when people have trauma and they have either singular events like a car crash, a battle, a war, um, a job loss, a bankruptcy, a house foreclosure, or a buildup of events, consistent financial neglect, growing up in poverty, um, whether it's singular or multiple events, our amygdala starts to misfire, and things that aren't necessarily dangerous feel really dangerous. And some things that are actually dangerous or we should be aware of, we're numb to. So that's where we start to dissociate. We kind of leave our bodies sometimes in extreme trauma responses. We avoid, you know, we get over escalated, or we over identified with some situation. These are all kind of responses to trauma. So when people have financial trauma, it's either coming from a money event, like a foreclosure, a bankruptcy, or, you know, my parents didn't talk to me about money. I'm feeling lost. I'm feeling scared and hopeless. Um, and it's coming out in some kind of financial behavior way. As a result of those situations, I'm not looking at my budget, or I'm looking at my budget way too often, or I'm hyper fixating on spending over my limit $10, and that causes, you know, anxiety or panic attacks for me, or I'm thrown into shame or depression loops. So point is financial trauma is anytime events lead us to act out certain things in our behavior. Um, it's rooted in our biology, um, and we can heal from it. We can recover from it, but a large part of it is just starting to recognize, like, oh, this is a, you know, trauma Nate or trauma Brett acting right now. This isn't maybe our wise self or our prefrontal cortex self, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I keep looking at my board here on the wall as I kind of looking past my camera. I actually have my horrible drawing of a brain up there, and the amygdala, and I call that the reason and the action space, which have 95% there. And the 5%, that prefrontal, is that desire, is that maybe where the genius lives too. And the challenge is keeping our actions coming from that prefrontal more than, you know, that reason and that action, because that's that amygdala, maybe where those habits and all of those other things live, right?
Hmm.
So
They're very reactionary. Yeah.
yep. So yeah, I was just looking up there, and it's interesting. I am not a physician, and I have not studied at all the brain other than the personal development stuff, and how much that is a topic inside of the personal development. If you think about everything, the self-realization is a huge piece inside the personal development piece. Understanding like these, how the brain works. We start with an idea, and the emotions, like the chemical processes, and how that drives our action. Even in the unconscious, the subconscious ways of, we don't even know this is happening. Like when I first, well, my wife always brings this up. She'll say, you know, when we first, you know, started dating, I would say something about your family, and I would get so, like, you would get so defensive, she would tell me. And I didn't even know it was happening. You know, whether it was about money or whatever it was, is you talked
Mhm.
about my family, you better hold on a second, right? But once we got past, I was able to communicate that
Mhm.
self-realization part. Okay, I was actually doing this. What's causing this? Am I really feeling this way? You know, understanding all of those pieces was interesting. And that too could be related to trauma and financial trauma. We were talking about. I'm thinking as a physician, as I'm reading different books, and Millionaire Next Door was one that has a lot of instances that I grasped in this idea of debt could be a massive financial trauma, right?
Mhm.
Depending
Absolutely.
on what, at the amount, the rate, those kinds of
Mhm.
things, the overwhelming feeling of it, how it drives and
Yep.
other decisions. And then this idea too of your expenses growing just as fast as your income. So you're basically creating machine that's eating itself. And I look in business, and trauma is when your overhead is creeping so high that, you know, does it really matter how much money you make if you can't keep any of it? So these types of
Mhm.
traumas that are out there, for physicians and for entrepreneurs and high performers, just understanding what it's still coming back down to the condition and the story and the action that you're taking in order to break that back down, right? Is that your kind of plan of attack, is just understanding the conditioning when you were younger, what you're seeing, those with the emotions that are created around money, the stories that you're telling yourself, and that gives you the opportunity and the self-realization that these are the actions that are causing from them, right? Does that sound right?
Mhm. Yeah, like obviously every person is a little different, but generally I tend to follow certain patterns when it comes to working through trauma. The first is depending on the intensity of the trauma, we start with stabilization. So, um, can we stop the bleeding first? And so we're gonna start with like, okay, how is the financial trauma showing up in your life right now? Is it Am I, spending with reckless abandon because of the trauma? Am I not looking at my information at all because I'm scared of what I'm going to see? Um,
Mhm.
but like, what are the effects that I'm seeing right now that we do need to get a hold of quickly? And then and a lot of times we start with some mindfulness skills. There, I know it's kind of been a buzzword for the last several decades, but quite honestly, it deserves to be. Little
It's entitled.
mindfulness
Is
skills.
it entitled to be?
Yes, it is. Mindfulness is entitled to have a place in our mental health dialogue.
Yeah.
But it those kinds of skills really do or can slow us down enough to kind of re-engage that prefrontal cortex. And then we start to look for patterns. And that's where we might do more of the past oriented work of, where is this coming from? Where did I first feel this? Um, who, who else or in what other situations have I felt this way? Um, and that kind of helps us better understand like where we're coming from. And then e- Sometimes even that alone can start to make changes. But then we have a process called integration, which just means knowing what I know about myself in the past and what I've gone through, and knowing where I want to go in the future will let me take a compassionate approach to small change. I know I know where I came from. These are the, weak point areas that I'm aware of. They're the little baby steps I can make. What does those look like for me? And the most important thing with there is just being as non-judgmental as you can be.
Towards
You're not on
yourself.
anyone else's time. Yeah, you're not on anyone else's timetable. Um, you're not racing against anybody else. You're gonna have setbacks. You're not gonna be perfect. We don't change our brain chemistry in a day. Like this takes time. But is there a baby step that I can celebrate some wins on? Um, but yeah, there's a whole process here.
Hmm. Interesting. In that process, just jot down a few notes there and just kind of like in my mind walking through that process, and just hopeful that these little things are getting picked up. And there's so much emotion around money that we just don't talk about it. And I think it's
Mhm.
just awesome what you're doing, and bringing it out and talking about it. And one platform that you do have is it's called Financial Therapy Clinical Institute.com. Financial
Mhm.
Therapy Clinical Institute.com. And you've got a group of awesome people you're talking about on there. You as a therapist, you've got a financial counselor, a couple counselors, and a couple financial planners as well too. So it's kind of like almost a full consulting group to help you uh, in this process. And I was hearing like stabilize, have mindfulness, and then integrate along that process as well too. So that's really cool. And if anybody wants to connect with you directly, they can find you on LinkedIn, Nathan Astle, which is Nathanastle, on LinkedIn.
Yep.
What what
And
what what is it that you hear a lot? Like, what's the most common block when it comes to money?
um, yeah, honestly, the most common one is the taboo nature of it. We don't talk about money, not really. Like we definitely don't talk about how deeply personal it can be. We talk about, skills and budgeting. We talk about salary negotiations, and those things are important, but we don't talk about the people part of money. And so a lot of people, when they reach out to me, they kind of just need to know they're not alone. They see an issue, they recognize that there's some problem with their money behaviors or money beliefs, and they feel like they're the only one. And so I think even just on a basic level, being like, yeah, this is a really common experience that many people have that have had your background. I think even that can be healing in its own way. And there's, again, not a brain expert, but there's quite a bit of research on the impact safe relationships have on us. Um, when our amygdala is going and we're in fight or flight mode, we have someone we trust, care about, love even, and they're calm and they're regulated. It helps our brain so much. I can go, if I'm at a 10, but I see my partner and they're safe and they're at a 2, I'm much more likely to come down quicker. So, what the biggest block is that we don't talk about it with each other. Not really. We're not vulnerable. Our society isn't great at this, and we're not really great at it in our relationships, our families, our friends. And obviously, I'm speaking in generalities, but um, yeah, I think a lot of good can come out of just being open
Mhm.
and real for a little bit.
Calm is contagious. I think that's a military term, and whether it's Army or Marines. I think that calmness that you're speaking of, whether it's the vibrations that are put off, the uh, body language, like all of these things added up to even around the things that we don't even know of yet, that we can't see, we can't measure. There's that aura that comes out, and it's just contagious. The same way with with positivity and happiness, these things are contagious, and especially in leadership roles. And you're saying in the partner, in the safe relationships, where that is probably even more contagious in those scenarios. What is it? Is there anything that you could add to the conversation? And I want to bring this in at some point or somehow talk about when that the need for separating time and money, as investors, as we pull together this path, we plant these seeds to build wealth in our lives. And wealth can be, two different things. It can be so many different things. Wealth can be you have everything you want, or wealth could be you want everything that you have. So any direction that you're looking at, that when you're able to separate your time from your money, that does something. What is your take? I mean, what are the emotions around that? Are there any blocks? Is there any trauma? How do we help people get there faster, or sooner, or easier?
Yeah, it, this is honestly something that I've had trouble with several times where, for most of my life, I got paid hourly, right? Like I got paid, my first job at a car wash or as a therapist, right? I get paid per session or per hour. And so I've ventured out into other kind of spaces where it's not just a one-to-one with my hour. Um, I think one of the biggest psychological places to start would be to remember that you are valuable, and it's not just your time. It's who you are. It's how you are. This might sound very woo woo, but you are worth money. And again, we're not necessarily entitled to money, but I see myself as valuable enough to build wealth in different ways other than just hourly work. I do think that's kind of a shift in our headspace. Now, obviously, there's a lot of factors that go into that, whether that's, there's societal barriers there. There's pieces to that we can't just cut and dry to a mindset. But I do think start with a solid sense of self-compassion, and that can help you decide next, like, okay, these are the avenues that I want to find and build wealth in. Um, and I don't have to have this one-to-one exchange with time in order for that to be the only way I build wealth.
Value. Yeah, I think that exchange is huge. Value, seeing the value in yourself and understanding that your income is directly proportionate to the value that you provide. And that value can be in
Mhm,
relationship, that can be in compassion and hearing and listening and showing, helping. Like there's so much value that just completely separates from that one-to-one time ratio. Understanding
mhm,
that you are valuable and that value is that's where uh, wealth is, I think. Um,
mhm.
if you could go back, Nate, 10 years and set beside somebody that is maybe on the same path as you, goals, cares about the same things, what would it be that you would tell them when in regards to the emotion around money? Or what would you tell them about money specifically?
Um, Honestly, my first thought was go to therapy. Um, uh, I do think get and I don't mean this to be like sarcastic or rude, but like get help. What I mean by that though is you don't have to do this alone. Um, that is something I think i- is a resource that is incredibly valuable. Is you don't have to have this all figured out by yourself. Um, Start there, and then I think the second kind of idea is you can afford the extra grace. You can't afford the extra shame. Um, that is something that I think, we're awfully hard on ourselves, especially highly driven people. Um, physicians, for example, like they're motivated, they're talented, they're smart, they work hard, and a lot of times it's because they're being driven by like my actions equals my value or my worth. And I don't think that that is necessarily true. And so, very often, highly driven people struggle with shame. They struggle with feeling good or not good enough. And the way they measure their metric of whether I am a good or not a good person or partner or business owner or whatever is by my output. And that is not a fair one-to-one. So I think that's the thing I would tell myself is, hey, you can afford to be a little bit kinder to yourself. And actually, the shame and the self punishment, that's actually getting in your way way more than you think it's helping. So that's where I would start.
Mhm.
Yes.
It's awesome. Get help and more grace, less shame.
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
awesome.
if there's nothing else you got out of this podcast, I hope it's that.
That's awesome. Well, I love this opportunity. I mean, I absolutely love having the podcast and get to speak with amazing people like you, Nate. I appreciate your time, your experience, and your passion that you've put into raising awareness, that mindfulness piece, the emotion around money, the ability to, hey, talk about this. And there are ways to get help. Like there are people that can help. and then build those relationships, build that safety, and then be able to create the calmness that we just talked about is contagious, right? But it's a blessing. I absolutely love
Mhm.
your time. I love being able to chat about stuff like this. I am a seeker myself and love information. I've gotten massive value from this conversation, and I'm sure that the listeners have as well too. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brent.
Awesome. And if you would like to directly connect with Nate, you can find him at Nathan Astle on LinkedIn, NathanAstle. And there's the website as well with the whole team in place. It's financialtherapyclinicalinstitute.com. And I tell you what, we're going to throw this up. I love this. I love the conversation, and I agree. I think that we should all be aware and mindfulness that this is out there. The conditioning that's happened, but when we didn't even know it was happening, there's conditioning there that's set in place these stories, and that is driving our actions. And having somebody to talk to about this is really important. So I'm going to throw this up as a resource on the Physician Wealth Systems webpage. So you'll be able to find that at physicianwealthsystems.com. If you have any questions directly, feel free to email us as well, info@physicianwealthsystems.com. And take a minute, drop us a comment, leave us a review, and tell us how awesome Nate was on this show. Leave a review, either Apple or Spotify. And until next time, we dearly appreciate your attention. And we know that means so much more than just time. Giving us your attention is really important. This is Brett and the Real Estate Mogul.